morning. This is the last week of our sermon series, Man's Best Friend, with a big question mark, right? We've been looking at our pups, our canine friends, what we can learn from them. And today is what I'm the most excited about. That's why I put it last, okay? We're going to be talking about barking at the unknown. Barking and at the unknown. Now, when I put up this picture, you presumably can all but hear the sound, right? Whether you've got a dog, whether your neighbor has a dog, right? And we know this sound. When dogs get all fired up, sometimes good reason, sometimes no reason at all. You hear this yipping, this barking, this loud sound. Sometimes it's good, right? Sometimes it's general communication. They communicate with each other. They're communicating with us. Let me in, let me out. Sometimes they're warning, right? Dogs have incredible senses. They can warn us about stuff that they can tell and they can know and see and we can't. But then sometimes, that's, wow. First it actually scared like the whole back row. Sometimes it happens for no reason at all. And actually, people who are way smarter than I am, scientists have studied this. There's a high percentage of time that dogs bark for no reason. They're actually barking at the unknown. So, we've seen this. Like, have you ever seen a dog and they're looking out the window and they're barking and you look out the window, you're like, there's nothing there. Why are you barking, right? And there is nothing there, but something upsets them and they're going to bark about it. And I'm really glad people don't do this. Right? How many times do we bark at the unknown? Things that freak us out. So I'm going to share a really cool illustration that comes from one of our members. She's in the first service. Sheila, this is Sheila's dog, Pasha. And this is Pasha not barking. Pasha's pretty calm, cool, and collected, 12 years old. She generally doesn't freak out. And so at one point, Sheila was with Pasha, and they're in their neighborhood park. Did this quite regularly. And brought Pasha there, and Pasha did what dogs do in the park, right? They walk around and sniff. And Sheila sees one of her neighbors, so they start talking. And as they talk and talk and talk, Pasha wanders and wanders and wanders, and Sheila looks over and sees her, right, and knows she's okay, so she'd go back to talking. Well, as this conversation wrapped up, Sheila noticed that Pasha was at the very edge of the park. And so at this point, right, some flags go off, and she says, okay, I got to get Pasha back. So she's waving, she's calling, she's whistling. The problem is Pasha's 12. So the hearing and the seeing doesn't work like it used to, unfortunately, right? So Pasha does the exact opposite. Pasha leaves the park and goes down the street. Now, as a concerned owner, of course, Sheila was a bit freaked out, and she immediately goes after the dog. So she runs over to the edge of the park, and she looks down the street to see Pasha. Pasha's not there. So now, out on the street, hasn't even seen the dog, understandably pretty freaked out. So she looks, and eventually she goes home. What's really interesting is where she found Pasha. At home, on the front porch, like, what's she worried about? I'm good. I went home. It's exactly what you might have expected me to do, right? I go to where I live. And here, the master, was concerned and afraid for the dog, but the dog was very much good to go. What I love about this illustration, I could have used this next week as well. Because when we talk about abide, we're going to talk about how to have our home in the Lord and how that should be a natural place to go home to. And Pasha clearly had it figured out. But we as people, sometimes we get freaked out when things leave our view and there's things that we're concerned about. And so today, that's why we're talking about fearlessness. When I talk about barking at the unknown, we are going to talk about how to stop doing that. And there are two basic things we need to remember about fearlessness, and it's right here. Fear God, fear nothing else. Fear God and fear absolutely nothing else. We're going to break this down and look at where this comes right out of the Bible. But I want to start by confronting and addressing what it is that you are afraid of. So you'll see there's a blank up here, there's a blank in your outline. And I want you to fill that out. What's your scary story? What's the thing that you are most afraid of? Or maybe there's a list and you need to take up that whole piece of paper. But I want to encourage you to write it down. And the reason for this is actually quite helpful. Something very powerful happens when you expose your fears to the light. When we talk about the things that we're afraid of, that we're worried about, that we're anxious about, and we talk about them with each other, or we write them down, very powerful things happen to us. You'll watch your fear of that thing will decrease. Okay? Psychologists have actually studied this and proven this to be true. When you talk about the things you're afraid of, Stephen King has made a living of it. Okay? And I had a really scary nightmare, which is kind of abnormal for me. I don't often remember my dreams and my nightmares, but there was one, and it was rough. And I won't tell you about it because I'm not going to try to freak you out. But the whole morning after I woke up, this thing haunted me. And so I decided to put this to the test. And I'll never forget, it was a Friday. I spent my entire Friday afternoon, and I wrote the nightmare out in a scary story. And I just told it like it happened to me, and it was amazing how it disappeared from up here, and it went onto the page. And I will tell you, literally, after that day, I never once naturally thought back to that nightmare, because I had exposed it. It was released, I had written about it, and so I was no longer afraid of it. Something really powerful happens when you do this. So I would encourage you, on that blank, write the thing or the things that you are afraid of, and watch what happens when we start to expose them to the light. Now, this is a really important subject biblically. Why people don't talk about it more, I don't know. But the word fear actually shows up 500 times in the Bible. 500. And normally you're going to see it, fear God shows up 18 times, and then almost as much, no fear shows up 17 times. That's where the title comes from. Fear God and for absolutely nothing else. This is the way God has called us to live. Let's look at this first part, okay, the fear God part. Fearing God only. 1 Peter 2:17 puts it this way. Honor everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. If we remembered these basic things, right, we'd be doing all right. Honor everyone. Love the family of believers, fear God, and honor the emperor. Notice that fear is not in front of any of those other people, right? We don't fear everyone. We don't fear the family of believers. We don't even fear the emperor, the ruler, our local governing rulers, right? God only. Fear God and fear God alone. Matthew 10:28 puts it in a very physical and direct way. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. That's the New Testament. It's pretty direct. Do not fear anyone here who might harm us, both emotionally, physically, because we know who's in charge. Ultimately, God's in charge. And he's the one who has ultimate authority over us and over everyone else, and so we should be fearing him and only him and nothing and no one else on this earth. Now, if we don't, God will take care of it. Look at Psalm 55:19. God, who's enthroned from of old, will hear and will humble them because they do not change and do not fear God. So think about it this way. Fear God or be humbled. Think of it in a physical way, right? You can either sit down or God will make you sit down. And I can tell you from past experience, when you don't fear God, when you don't respect God in an area of your life, and he has to come around and humble you there, that's not fun. It is not fun, and it is not pleasant. It is far easier to just say, God, I fear you and respect you totally in all areas of my life. I respect that this is your will, this is your way for my life. And that way, he doesn't have to humble you and remind you who's in charge. Because ultimately, he is always going to be in charge. So fear God or be humbled. Abraham gives us a very powerful expression of what this can look like. Hopefully most of you know the story of Abraham and his son, right? His beloved son Isaac, and he was told to give up that son as a fantastic expression of what fearlessness looks like. And once he did that, God said to him, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. It's just a beautiful picture. Once Abraham was willing to hand over his son, right, that one son that he wanted so badly, and once God knew that he entrusted him completely with his son, his prized thing, right, his prized boy, he said, I'm not going to do anything to him. I just wanted to know that you feared and respected me. And it's incredibly ironic if you think about it. God, who gave up his only son, didn't, of course, take that son from Abraham. He just wanted to know that he feared him. This is we should be looking for these type of people, right? We should be recruiting people who fear God. Look at Exodus 18:21. You should also look for able men among all the people, men who fear God, are trustworthy, and hate dishonest gain. These are the type of people we should be surrounding ourselves with. Your friends, organizations, your coworkers. You should be looking for people who fear God and fear absolutely nothing else. Men and women, right? Who fear God and fear nothing else. Now, let's move on to that fear nothing else part. We've covered the fear God. Let's do the fear nothing else. This is my life verse, Psalm 27:1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Now, we've talked about this verse before, so I want to focus in on just one word this morning, and it's stronghold. That word stronghold, what does it mean that the Lord is our stronghold? Why shouldn't we be afraid, in other words? The word here is ma'ot, and it means a place or means of safety or protection. Might be easier to think about images. This word is translated a few different ways in the Old Testament, and one of the ways is as a harbor. So you guys know harbors, right? Those are those places, generally you see them in the ocean, and they're protected either naturally or otherwise from the deep sea, from the waves, from the forces that might get to those boats, those ships, those people that are inside the harbor. Okay, it's a safe place for boats to come into port and to find refuge, which leads to that second word, a refuge. So you might think of a wildlife refuge, where animals can go knowing that they're protected, knowing they're safe, knowing where they can flourish. That's what God's supposed to be for us. A harbor, a refuge, or a helmet. This word is actually translated helmet. Think about God as something you could actually put on your head to keep you from the arrows that will come. But he's got you covered. Literally, he's the helmet that you can put on. Now, there's something I want you to notice, though, about these three words and what a stronghold is. These three things suggest something to others. Keep out. You'll notice that a harbor and a refuge and a helmet all protects you from something, and at times actually protects you from other people. Which means as Christians, there is a time and a place, not all the time, a time and a place to go to that stronghold, that refuge, just you and just God. Where everyone else needs to stay, everyone else for a little bit, and there's time with you and the Lord. Now, I know this sounds a little bit weird, but you got to remember, even Jesus Christ did this. Even Jesus, the perfect person to walk the earth, which we know loved everyone, at times he left people, right? To go and be with the Lord, to be with a stronghold and his refuge. That's why it's so important that we do this today. And I don't know what time this is for you guys, where this is. Sometimes it's prayer time. Sometimes it's singing alone, the car, the shower, whatever, right? Retreats, getting away and being with God. It is so important that you have this time in your stronghold. So then when it's over, when you leave that harbor, right, we can go back out into the ocean, go out into the deep waters of the world, and we can be powerful, fearless witnesses. But we need this time alone with our stronghold with the Lord. Now, one reason you should not be afraid of others, anything in this world, is because you're never really alone. Okay? Think of it this way. No fear because you're never alone. Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and bold. Have no fear or dread of them, because it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. This means if we believe in God, if we believe in Jesus, if we believe that the Spirit can inhabit us because of that belief, you're never really alone. Ever. Even we want to be, right? Those moments when you feel like it's you against the world, it's actually not just you against the world. It's you and God, probably not against the world either, loving the world to redeem it, to bring it closer to him. So remember, we're called to not be afraid because you're never truly alone in whatever situation or circumstance you think you have to handle on your own. God is right there with you. Now, this whole idea allows me to address a very common saying I hear a lot of Christians say. Okay? Here's the statement. God won't give you more than you can handle. How many of you have heard people say this? Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm not going to ask to show hands how many of you have said this, because it's wrong. It is completely and totally wrong. And we're going to talk about why, and it's very important. The whole phrase came out of 1 Corinthians 10:13. This is where we came up with this statement. But this is what the Bible actually says, and it's a very important distinction. No testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. We don't need to be afraid because you're not handling it alone. You see the problem with the statement, right? It's not that God won't give you anything you can't handle. I have repeatedly in my life been confronted with situations that I alone cannot handle. The statement is that God won't give you anything he can't handle. And I've heard it, you've heard it, right? And I get the idea. Someone feels like they're at the end. I just can't take anymore. God's told me he's not going to give me anything, but I can't handle it, and I just can't handle it. And I literally picture God like right above them, like, let me help you. Let me take it from you. Let me handle it with you. Give me some time to work my will in it. I don't want you to do this alone. It's a big but in that last verse, right? And it says, but God will give you a way out, even in those very challenging situations. But don't try to do it alone. We've got to stop trying to live without God. Now, this is a convicting one for me, because I have a tendency to be independent and introverted. But there are times even I have had moments where I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not taking care of this alone. And I had one such of those examples. How many of you guys have been to the quote-unquote secret beach in Kauai? Am I the only one? All right, awesome. Not the only one who's tried this. So I was going to Kauai. Only one time I was able to go. It was for someone's wedding. And before I went, I had a former partner of mine, who came to me and said, hey, there's this secret beach in Kauai. I should have known when they described it as like a secret beach, right? So there's a secret beach, and all you got to do is you got to go down this road, and I had written it down, go down this road, and then make I think it was a left on this road, and then just keep going, and eventually you'll find it. Now, this beach is called Kauapea Beach. It's not so secret anymore, but it's amazing how many people don't go to this beach. But at the time, this is before Google Maps, okay? So I'm not pulling this thing up and following the route. I just listened to what the guy told me. I wrote it down, and I made the turn, and I didn't realize that this turn would require me to do a little bit of off-roading. So at the time, I was in the perfect vehicle, right, for this type of off-roading. I was in this beautiful orange Mustang rental, right? Convertible top down, of course, because I'm a dope. I'm California and Hawaii. And I make this turn, and I realize there is no way I should be on this road in this vehicle. And as soon as I made the turn, I also realized that there was no one else there. Literally, I drove for 5 minutes, and I saw no one. No people, no cars. And at first, this is kind of exhilarating. Like, it's exactly why I'm going to Secret Beach, right? So there's not a lot of people. But then 5 minutes in, I was like, yeah, there's no one else here. Am I even going the right way? I don't know where I'm going. I didn't have a GPS on me. What is happening? So 5 more minutes go by, and I'm kind of freaked out at this point. I'm alone on the road, heading to a secret beach that I've just been told is there. And fortunately, all of a sudden, coming the other direction was someone who was in a way more equipped car, by the way. And he was coming away from the beach. And I pulled over, and I was like, thank God. I said, is there a beach up ahead? I felt like an idiot asking the question. He's like, absolutely, and there's no one else there. And all of a sudden, I realized how fortunate I was to find someone who had been where I was going, and to know that I wasn't lost, and that I wasn't on this road alone. And it was a wonderful feeling. This is the feeling we should have with God. He has been on the road before. He is ahead of you. He knows where you're going. You don't have to do this alone. We got to stop trying to live without him. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds nice if you spend a lot of time with God, right? You're reading his word, you're in prayer, you're close to him, you're obedient. What happens if I'm, not so close? Well, fortunately, the Bible says you don't have to be afraid even if you're far from him. Look at Jeremiah 30:10. But as for you, have no fear, my servant Jacob, says the Lord. And do not be dismayed, O Israel, for I'm going to save you from far away, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. Jacob shall return and have quiet and ease, and no one shall make him afraid. It doesn't matter how close or far you are from God. You call him, he is right there. If you remember that story I was telling you about Sheila and her dog Pasha, right? Sheila didn't see Pasha at the end of the park and be like, you're on your own. No, of course not, right? She ran after her chased her all the way home. I picture here the father of the prodigal son, right? When the son came back to the father, the prodigal father, he didn't stand there at the edge of his property like this. Can't believe you left me, right, with all of your inheritance. He ran to him. The moment he knew he was coming back, he didn't even need to hear the apology. The father ran to the son. This is how it works with God. It doesn't matter how far away you are. You call him because you need him, because you're afraid. He is right there. And that is a promise. Now, one of the things I think people tend to get worked up about and get even afraid of are things that are false or people who are doing the wrong thing, and it seems like they're getting away with it. There are so many examples in the Bible, particularly in the Psalms, about this concern. I see all these people, and they're doing all this bad stuff, and it looks like they're getting away with it. What is the problem? God, why aren't you taking care of it? Look at Matthew 10:26. So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. It's a helpful reminder for me, and again, right out of the New Testament, folks. God is on it. He sees it. He is going to take care of it. Maybe not in our timing, but usually in this lifetime, we will see the truth always comes out. Always. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to be afraid of it. You don't have to be afraid of them. God's going to take care of it in this world or the next, and so you do not need to be afraid. Now, there's a very interesting inverse relationship about these two things we've been talking about. Okay? Fear God only and fear nothing else. And the relationship is this. As you find that your fear of God goes up, you will find that your fear of anything else will go down. The more you respect him and trust him that he's got every area of your life, you will watch your fear of all this other stuff on this earth. It will go down. The problem is the inverse is, of course, true, right? As your fear of things in this world, as your anxieties and worries about things in this world go up, your fear of God goes down. It's a very natural and normal thing. But watch this. If you try this and you take that thing that you've just written down on your bulletin, right? You filled in that blank and you say, God, take this. Watch what happens to your earthly fears. The more we hand over to him, the more we fear him and trust him, your fear of everything else on this earth will naturally go down. Now, one really cool reason, a great motivation, I think, to not be afraid is you don't have to be afraid if you're doing everything good, you're doing everything right. Look at Romans 13, 3-4. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of the authority? Then do what is good, and you'll receive its approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid. For the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is the servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. I think one of the best illustrations, one of the most tangible illustrations for us is many of you probably drove here and are going to drive home. You know that feeling you get when you see the black and white on the side of the car? Or you see those lights, right? You're like, oh, shoot, that's the police. Watch what happens if you were to drive home today and you drove the speed limit or less. You went to every single stop sign and stopped. And I mean completely stopped. Right? I know, California stop, I lived it. Okay? Or now, right, it's October, we've got this new law about holding our phones in our hands, touching them in any way when that car is moving. If you all of a sudden drove your car perfectly, you'd see the black and whites and you'd just wave. Right? Hi, officer. Nothing to see here. Good to go. This is what God is trying to get us to do, to a point where we're literally living our lives, living this out as much as possible, so we have nothing to be afraid of in this life. And if we fear him and we do all that he tells us to do, you got nothing to worry about here. And when you do, that can be a very sad thing. Plato put it this way a long, long time ago. We can easily forgive a child who's afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. When men are afraid of the truth, when men are afraid of being exposed in some area of their lives, men or women, of course, that's a problem. When we're afraid of the light, the truth radiating on our lives. even when we make mistakes. Because it actually should be okay to make mistakes. Because we know God's forgiven it on the cross, and if we believe that we as Christians should forgive each other, we should be able to openly acknowledge those mistakes to other people, because it's going to be forgiven, right? If we're truly living this out. 2 things you should know about fear and its relationship to your life, and one other important principle. You cannot live in fear. You cannot fully live in fear. It's not the way God made you. Dorothy Thompson puts it this way: only when we are no longer afraid do we begin to live, to truly live in fearlessness. This is why I think as Christians this is so important for us to live out. I think one of our greatest witnesses as Christians could be to be a fearless people. To literally live our lives and say, look, God is number one and we're not afraid of anything else. Be a beautiful witness to the world. The other thing you can't do in fear is love. You cannot love in fear. 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment. And whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. If you want to have true and full loving relationship with anybody, there can be no fear. No fear of what they think of you, no fear of judgment, no fear. And that actual self-giving love, right, should drive any fears that you have away. So you can't live in fear, and you cannot love in fear. Now, the other thing you need to remember about fear, and this is where the pastor gets to preach to himself, okay? You do not need to fear the unknown. I don't need to fear the unknown. I used to say for the longest time, I'm not afraid of much but the unknown. And it sent me almost on this endless pursuit to know everything and to learn everything. And once I knew something about it, I didn't need to be afraid of it. And then I got baptized and God started to go to work on me. And it was very, very effective. He's now been working on me for years on this. And what I've had to realize is we have to expect the unknown. We have to expect that stuff is going to happen outside of our control, and it is okay. Matthew 6:34. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. Remember the example of the dog barking out the window, right? And you hear the sound, and it's super annoying when a dog does it. Why do we think it's any different with us as people? Right? People worried and freaking out about stuff that hasn't even happened, that we cannot control. Tomorrow's going to have some issues. Let's just all acknowledge that, face it, and fearlessly live into it, and know that God's going to cover it when it happens. Remember, God is going to give us a way out when tomorrow brings those troubles, so we don't need to be afraid of it. God's going to take care of it. Now, a bit of a clarification I have to give. One time, I was giving this sermon, and when I was giving it, I actually had a bunch of children in the room. A bunch of children. And so afterwards, a very wise and very concerned parent came up to me and said, "Did you just look at a bunch of kids and tell them not to be afraid?" I said, "Yes, I did, and I meant it." And then she shared her concern. She goes, "So do you mean when a kid walks out of the school and they see that van with the tinted windows and it's unmarked and they're giving candy out, you want them to go up to that van?" And I said, whoa, hold on. I said, don't be afraid. I didn't tell them to be irresponsible. It's really important to understand that fear is not caution. I didn't say don't be cautious, don't be careful, right? Don't be considerate. I just said don't be afraid of those type of situations. So look at these 2 words to make sure we understand the difference. Fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. Caution, on the other hand, is care taken to avoid danger or mistakes. Notice that the emotion is fear, and that's what I've said we shouldn't do. We should have any unpleasant emotion or fear of anything in this world, but we should have care, which is an action, and it's a big difference. Fear is the emotion that God doesn't want us to have. Care is what He does want us to have about the decisions we make on a daily basis. We should be careful, we should be cautious and considerate, but we shouldn't do it out of a position of fear, because fear can actually cause us to make very uncareful, very dangerous, and very unsafe decisions. That's why He calls us to fearlessness, so that we can make those good decisions on a daily basis. Now, interestingly enough, one of the best ways for you to combat your fears is action. Remember we talked about fear as that emotion, and then next up, care, that caution is an action. The best way to combat your fear is action. Ralph Waldo Emerson put it beautifully. Always do what you are afraid to do. Always. Doesn't matter what the fear is. Heights, go higher. Public speaking, go speak in public. Conflict. Fear conflict? Have some conflict. And watch what happens to your fear. It's a fascinating thing. The more we try it, the more we step into it, that fear will diminish, and you're going to see, oh yeah, God can take care of that. Fear of God goes up, fear of anything else goes down. W. Clement Stone put it this way: thinking will not overcome fear, but action will. Thinking about it, stewing about it, worrying about it, that's not going to change your fear. Acting in the face of it, that will change and diminish your fear every time. Now, as we take communion, I want us to think about it in this way, that never fear, communion is here. What we celebrate every single week is actually the act of fearlessness that Jesus undertook on our behalf. Who, even after his prayer right in the garden, went to the cross anyway, so that we never need to be afraid again. Let's pray before we take communion this morning. God, we thank you so much that you call us to live lives of fearlessness, that we fear and respect you and you only, but then nothing else, no one else. You've designed us this way. You want us to live our lives this way. And God, I pray that we'll be better witnesses to how you created us because of our fearlessness, that we respect you, fear you, and you use us to change this world for you. And as we think about our motivation for doing that, we remember the way that you've saved us and put us in a position so we can even live fearless lives. You did it by giving your Son, your only Son, on that cross for us. And Jesus, you absolutely, fully, and completely cooperated in the face of discomfort, giving of yourself for us. And we remember that now as we take the bread. We remember your body, Jesus, broken for us. As we take the cup of juice, we remember the blood of Jesus poured out fearlessly for us. We thank you, we love you, and it's in your name, Jesus, we do this and pray. Amen.